met her, and I think those of you who know her well will resonate with this. We were actually in a much older incarnation of the offices of Global Teams here in Bakersfield. We were down in Oildale in some offices connected to a warehouse that our church was using. The front warehouse was actually a legal marijuana growing facility. So we were well positioned, I think, for the mission world. But we were looking for an administrative assistant to work with me. I had been doing all my own flights and travel and scheduling of appointments and all sorts of things. And we had advertised for that. Pat had seen it, had put together her resume, and I was on a call in the middle of an appointment, and she had been told that, and somehow got herself past the person in the front office who was telling her that I was busy, made her way to the back, and made sure that I knew that she was physically putting that file on my desk, even as I was on the phone with somebody else. I think that tenacity and stick-to-itness, she herself sometimes referred to herself as a bulldog with things, stood her well. I also joked with her a number of times that she wasn't our first choice for the job. I actually first picked somebody else for this, although I had real misgivings. It was down to Pat and somebody else, and I had some real misgivings about it. But I offered it to another person who, on paper, was more qualified as an administrative assistant, on paper, had more of the skills of an administrator. I would say spiritually, in terms of spiritual gifts, had the gifts of administration, but ended up turning down the position because they got offered something else. And so I called Pat. And what I discovered was that Pat was exactly the right person for the job, because although the other person, I would say, had a primary gifting in the area of administration, and I think that administratively that was probably Pat's secondary, or one of her secondary sets of gifts. What Pat brought to this, and what those of you who are hearing this saw exhibited in her life over and over and over again, was a primary gifting of helps and service, what the Bible calls helps. And sometimes that's a gift that gets demeaned. What it meant is that what I saw, at least, drove Pat moment by moment, day by day, was her desire to help anybody do anything that they needed help with. And I saw that certainly in how she served as my personal assistant at the beginning, and then as she moved into the role of Chief Administrative Officer within Global Teams. And it was in that position that people literally all over the world received Pat's help. Her desire to drop anything she was doing at the time, often stuff that she was doing for me, and serve whatever had come across her desk, whoever had come across her desk, across her phone line, across her email. And it was that desire to help and to be of help that I saw as Pat's primary drive and motivation in her ministry with us in Global Teams. And it was a ministry. She served people with the heart of Christ. And she bought completely into how Global Teams operated and what we were doing. And I know that, one of the things that I know in my own experience, and also that several of you have shared with me, is that one of the things that really motivated Pat was, for want of a better term, the pat on the back, words of appreciation, job well done, etc. And it's one of those things that I look back on and think, I could have told her job well done multiple times any given workday, and I'm sure I'd never said it enough to her. But what I'm grateful for is that, looking back now, I'm grateful that there have been a number of key moments, a number of key turning points in GT or my life at which I had the presence of mind to turn to her or make a point of turning to her and saying, Pat, global teams would not be what it is, and I probably would not be continuing in my leadership of global teams if it weren't for you serving alongside and among us. Now, that's not to say, and all of you gathered in a place like this, on an evening like this, and living close to and loving Pat, it's not to say that there weren't times that she drove you all crazy, and me too. But I would not be what I am, and I would not have been able to continue in the ministry of leadership in GT without Pat being there alongside to hold up tired arms, do things on my behalf, do things that I don't even know she did for me to help me succeed. And global teams would not be what it is today without her. When she first stepped into the role of personal assistant, which then grew to be chief administrative officer, my right-hand person in almost every facet of what we do, we were a much, much, much smaller organization and a much less complicated band of brothers and sisters than we are today. And Pat was alongside for just about every one of the key transitions that we've gone through. So it's with a full and grateful and rejoicing heart that I join you, even at a distance, in celebrating Pat's life. I know that she wanted this to be a celebration, and I rejoice that the first person we offered this job to turned us down. I rejoice that Pat made her way past the front line of defense in our office and got that resume on my desk. I rejoice in all the things that God has used Pat to do in our midst over these years. And I join you tonight in giving thanks to the Lord for Pat's life and service among us. So God bless each of you, each one. And I pray and feel confident that your hearts are as full as mine. God bless you all. Good night.
30 years ago, Pat came here. The first Sunday that she was here, she was sitting in the back. And she looked troubled, and my wife went back to talk to her. And they developed a relationship, and Pat says, "This is my church. This is where I'm coming." And this has been her church ever since. She's moved away some, but she comes back here. This has been her church. And I hadn't got to know Pat and Don much. I just met them. And one day I was in my office, which is back here, and I always kept this door open here, or unlocked. And I sat in the office and I heard a guitar strumming, and I heard an angelic voice. And I didn't hear anybody come in. Is that an angel? You know, you've read about angels and you've heard about them. Is that an angel? And it kind of frightened me. And so I opened my door to the office and I listened. Oh, it was sweet. And I slowly came right out here and I through that door and looked around, and here she sat here up on the stage playing her guitar and singing a song. And I tell you, that was the sweetest voice I think I've ever heard. I loved her voice. I was her number one fan. I thought she had the voice of an angel, and that started her music career here, leading worship. And she had such a heart for young people. She was always teaching young people. I don't know how many people in church she taught to play the guitar, and how many she taught to play the synthesizer, and how many she coached in singing. That was her heart, and her heart was just working with young people and working with hurting people. And her and my wife worked so much together with hurting people, and she was always available for hurting people. She just loved to minister, and she was so full of enthusiasm. And she would always throw herself into whatever she was doing. She was like a bull in a china closet sometimes. She would just go for it. And her dad and mom were out here one time, and I was talking with her dad, and of course, Pat had said that he's my East Coast dad, and you're my West Coast dad. And you know what Dick said to me? He said, man, you got the hardest of the job. I only come out here once a year to crowd, and you got to crowd her all year long. And she could talk. And you know, some people can talk and talk and talk, and they're boring. But Pat could go on and on and on. She was never boring because she would hit this thing, she soaks out of that. Then she hit this thing, she soaks out, and then another thing. And it wasn't boring listening to her like it is some people that just drone on and on and on. And I hate to talk on the phone very long. And Pat called me up one night. She had something on her mind. Oh, she was just so excited. And she talked, and she talked, and she talked, and she talked, and she talked. And finally, I'm looking at the clock, and an hour had gone by. I never talked to anybody on the phone for an hour. I finally said, Pat, I can't take this anymore. I can't talk on the phone this long. I'm